Marwan Bishara, he's Al Jazeera's senior political analyst. He's joining us by Skype from Paris to talk about this. Marwan, Linda Thomas-Greenfield, going through the statements that we've heard before from the US about the concern that they have for the number of casualties, particularly in Gaza. And she did say that Israel has a right to respond to threats, but how it does it matters. Nevertheless, it seems as though she was, again, reiterating the US line that any fault, any delay when it comes to negotiations lies with Hamas rather than with the Israeli government. And it seems to be an encouragement to try to get Hamas to the negotiations, but of course that may prove difficult.
Well, I tell you, I actually envy you for the capacity to repeat all of that. When we all know it's Groundhog Day every time the UN Security Council convenes, and the Americans repeat more of the same. The same thing for the English, the same thing for the Algerians. They all seem to be, basically political commentators rather than diplomats representing states, with the exception perhaps of the Americans. And the American ambassador basically read the same sound bites, the same lines she did in previous speeches, with one difference. I'm not sure you've noticed, perhaps our viewers around the world did. The United States is not just concerned now. The United States is deeply concerned. That's the difference. Deeply concerned. I'm sure the people in Gaza, the children of Gaza, are going to sleep better tonight because the United States is deeply concerned. While, of course, repeating more of the same mantras. It's very Orwellian for the United States to continue to talk about defense and stability and peace and ceasefire and so on and so forth, while it's edging on financing, arming Israel. And here I'm repeating myself, shielding Israel at the United Nations, supplying it with all the arms it needs to carry its genocide and to carry violations of international law against Lebanon and Iran, and to defend it when those countries would want to retaliate. This is basically, as I said, Groundhog Day every day, the past 24 times, as Gabrielle told us earlier, since October 7.
The Algerian representative, Amar Benjamin, when he was speaking, and as I mentioned, it was Algeria who called this emergency meeting, was talking at one point about the attacks that have been going on in the West Bank, but also particularly in Gaza. He made the point that the attacks would not be possible without the generous support that Israel gets. Now, I'm paraphrasing what he was saying, but that was essentially what he was meaning. And as I was discussing with Gabriel Elizondo, a correspondent, almost at this exact moment, the notification started to come out on the wires that the US Secretary of State Antony Blinken has just approved $20 billion worth of US military equipment to be delivered to Israel. And this is really where we see, as you were just talking about, the heart, the split, if you like, in the situation that we find ourselves. Because on the one hand, the US is saying that it's concerned about the number of casualties, that Israel has the right to respond, but how it does it matters. But at the same time, of course, it does not stop the flow of military aid to Israel.
It's truly unprecedented audacity in international relations when it comes to the United States justifying Israel's crimes and supporting Israel's crimes and arming and financing Israel as it carries its crimes, all the while talking about peace, stability, ceasefire, and the concern over it, the deep concern for casualties in Gaza. It's an unprecedented audacity. It's Orwellian in every possible way. But what is happening in the meanwhile? I mean, I'm not here. None of us is trying to be clever about this. In the end of the day, you can't really clever out death, right, and destruction and genocide, I should say. Because what is happening is through these 24 type meetings at the UN Security Council and through the very support that you just spoke about from Antony Blinken and the likes, America sends its diplomats to the region. Now, I think 3 or 4 of them are going to show up. McGurk, what's his name, Antony Blinken, and the CIA Director, Bill Burns, and perhaps the U.S. National Security Advisor. They will all be in the Middle East. All the while, it's sending armadas, strike forces, the most powerful armadas in the world, the biggest aircraft carriers the United States has, the Lincoln, right? So it sends the diplomats, but it also sends the armadas. It talks about diplomacy, but it's really more or less like gunboat diplomacy, right? It just sends in the armadas and threatens everyone around as if the Middle East is its backyard. The Middle East is 2 oceans away from the United States, but it behaves like it's the Gulf of Mexico. It is not the Gulf of Mexico. The Middle East is the Middle East. America or North America is 2 oceans away. But anyway, be that as it may, and this is my real, my essential point here. The United States is allowing Israel to get away with genocide by arming it, financing it, and shielding it at the United Nations. The United States is enabling Israel's genocide and allowing Israel to get away with genocide. Not only that, now it's allowing both the Israeli government and its Prime Minister, Netanyahu, to get away with their war crimes by shielding them from the ICC and the ICJ and the likes. And even giving them all kinds of guarantees so that if they do reach a ceasefire, their government will not implode, because secretly the United States is guaranteeing that Israel can go back to the war after phase 1 of phase 3 of 3 phases of the ceasefire, according to Israeli media reports. So really, all in all, it is tragic that we sit here and we try to analyze just to find any light in the end of the tunnel, and we find the word deeply concerned instead of just concerned, while the United States, once again, is enabling genocide in Palestine.
Marwan, we're waiting to hear from the Russian representative to the UN Security Council. So I just want to keep asking you some questions until we get to that point. Forgive me if I have to break away if you're giving me an answer. But I want to widen this out a little bit and just talk about the negotiations themselves. 2 things are absolutely evident. Hamas now has a leader, Yasser, who is in Gaza. Ismail Haniyeh, when he was alive, was the political head of Hamas, and he traveled the world as part of these talks in order to be part of the negotiations. Sinwar is in Gaza. He is very unlikely to leave Gaza. That's going to slow any process down. Now, Linda Thomas-Greenfield is saying, no, Hamas has to be at the table in these talks. They have to be represented. Qatar says there will be some sort of representation. What kind of impact do you think this is going to have on the effectiveness of whatever talks we're going to see on Thursday?
I'm actually pretty sure, analytically and from the various sources and reports that I've seen, that nothing changes with Sinwar being in Gaza and Ismail Haniyeh having been assassinated, in terms of the logistics and in terms of who makes a decision and how collective is a decision and how it's consensual and institutional within Hamas, and why Hamas is in fact a very disciplined group, regardless of who's on the head and regardless of the geography of where is the person who heads it. And I think they already said that that issue is not going to be a problem, and they've already made some proposal towards how they see this thing needs to move forward in order to end as quickly as possible. Now, having said that, let me remind our viewers around the world, and let me tell you about the New York Times report today. It's an exclusive report in the New York Times, and I bet you anything you want that the American ambassador read it, just like the English ambassador and the other ambassadors. They read it because it's a very important report in the New York Times that basically says that they got the documents from the various ceasefire negotiations, from the various roundtables, what went on and so on and so forth, what were the documents. And the New York Times concluded that it was Netanyahu that obstructed the progress towards ceasefire. That each and every time he either underlined, expanded his conditions, or added new conditions for why, at least since May, when the UN Security Council adopted that, its Resolution 2735 for the ceasefire, Israel has been obstructing its own, or its American version of its own ceasefire proposal, because Netanyahu does not want a ceasefire. He didn't want a ceasefire. I'm not sure if he's going to be pushed into a corner now, with Biden basically saying, look, if you're going to continue to obstruct, as the New York Times reports, we're going to have to call you out on it this time. because Biden basically is not running for re-election, and there's a good chance, according to at least a number of his reports, that Biden might call him out on it this time around. That he just will not leave it vague. He will not blame Hamas for it. He, like Gallant, the Israeli defense minister, will call out Netanyahu for being the obstructionists in why the parties, why the mediators are not able to reach a ceasefire deal.
I want to ask you about the other side of this, which is, or the other background to all of this, which is of course, Iran's threat to respond on behalf of the assassination of Ismail Haniyeh in Tehran. It's been holding off and holding off. There's been a lot of speculation that that response may well come within the next few days. As far as I can tell, that speculation, or that public speculation, seems to be coming particularly from the United States. In your assessment, is there anything in the suggestion that Iran is holding off doing anything until it finds out what happens on Thursday, or perhaps in the succeeding few days, to try to establish what kind of response and what scale of response, if any at all, it actually makes, depending on whether or not the talks go ahead? And if that is the case, and I'm jumping ahead a little bit here, could that be part of the leverage that the US is perhaps using on Israel to say, you can have this deal, we'll just give you $20 billion worth of military equipment as well, and we can give you a guarantee that Iran is going to either have a limited response or no response at all?
Well, the answer is yes and yes, probably. Yes and yes, probably. Because already we have one Iranian official talking to Western wire services, Western media, saying that only a ceasefire deal could prevent an Iranian response. We don't have that from the acting foreign minister or from the president, but there is some sort of noise from Iran that if you do reach a deal sooner than later, this could be a factor of why Iran would not retaliate, at least for the time being, right? I mean, they could also always say that they're postponing, not stopping it altogether, just freezing it. The other thing is that this could be used as a leverage against Israel by the United States or by Iran itself. It says, you don't want to be punished for your assassination of Haniyeh and violation of our sovereignty. You're going to have to work out a deal. Now, and this is important, back to my original point. Whether there is or there isn't an Iranian strike, I am sorry to say that. I know this is important, and I just answered that question. But either way, Israel is getting away with genocide. Because as you just stated, they will be rewarded. And they are already rewarded with billions, tens of billions of dollars. And they're going to be rewarded moving forward with normalizations of relations with a good number of powerful Arab countries. They're going to be rewarded for moving the ethnic cleansing to Jewish Jerusalem, for violating and consecrating Al-Aqsa Mosque, for annexing territories on the West Bank, for beginning to do in the West Bank a version of what they try to do in Gaza. So they're gonna get away with genocide in Gaza, and because they are doing it with such impunity, they're gonna probably do it again and again and again throughout Palestine and perhaps in the region. Because why not? If you are an Israeli leader listening to the people at the UN Security Council, you would say they're stupid. I mean, what are they saying? If you're an Israeli, right? I'm not projecting here. If you're an Israeli prime minister, you say, these people are stupid, or they think people are stupid. They think Palestinians are stupid. Because they're not doing anything. They talk like political commentators. And they talk from past speeches to the UN. Can you believe that they still talk about two-state solution? And I'm talking about powerful countries like Russia, China, even the United States. When there's an Israeli government that's committed to no two states, when they're committed in every possible way, and today they are acting in every possible way to prevent the establishment of a Palestinian state. So while they talk about being committed to a two-state solution, they don't even say, well, Israel actually reject that, while the Palestinian Authority is for it, or even Hamas is for it, right? So here we have a situation whereby Israel is getting away with murder. It's getting away with mass murder, with genocide. right? And that's being allowed because of the impotence of the international community, the weakness of the Arab world, the cynicism of Western powers, notably the United States, but continue to sell us words, while in reality supporting Israel in its genocidal war against the Palestinians.
From what you've been saying, it sounds as though that Benjamin Netanyahu is probably as isolated as he has ever been in his prime ministership of Israel. His foreign supporters are now appearing to, if nothing else, identify him as the problem. Do you think that in the event that there is no solution that is reached as a result of ceasefire negotiations that start on Thursday or at any other time, that the end of Netanyahu's tenure in Israel may end up coming about because of internal pressures, that eventually the people of Israel and his fellow politicians will have to draw a line and say, enough is enough, you are responsible for this and you have to go?
Well, I actually see, especially since Netanyahu was invited to speak to both houses of Congress for the fourth time, historic. He's the only leader in history to speak to both houses of U.S. Congress 4 times, to once again meet with President Biden, and once again being met with claps, 53, 54, 55 times by American senators and congressmen, being, received with embraced at the White House. That Netanyahu feels invincible. That Netanyahu now will probably, I would think, will fire his defense minister, who is a member of his own party, Likud, by the way, and bring someone else from perhaps one of the smaller factions on the radical right to replace him, and even expand his coalition from 64 to potentially 68 or 70.
Make sure to subscribe to our channel to get the latest news from Al Jazeera.